This is CTS, family-friendly television. We care who's watching.
Hi and welcome to Rhonda Live. On the show today, prisoners' rights. Prison inmates who are opposed to eating meat have won a constitutional right to be fed vegetarian meals. That's the decision of the federal court, a decision that came in a long-running grievance instigated by sex offender Jack Maurice. He believes the consumption of animal products is morally wrong. Remember, this is a sex offender. The victims' advocacy group calls the ruling insanity. An appeal of the decision is possible. Meantime, another bizarre story making headlines. Inmates at a Saskatchewan penitentiary, including some sex offenders, were treated to pizza and pornography on New Year's Eve. It's stories like these that have many people contending that prisoners are being treated more like hotel guests than criminals. What do you think? What rights should prisoners retain behind bars? And what rights should they leave at the front gate? As always, the phones will be open to take your calls to hear what you have to say. Joining us in studio, Bruce Miller. He's the administrator of the Police Association of Ontario, the official voice for Ontario's frontline police personnel. Bruce, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me here today, Rhonda. We appreciate it.
What are your thoughts when you hear these stories that are making headlines? Maurice has won the right to eat vegetarian fare behind bars. This is a sex offender who says that it's morally reprehensible to eat meat. You hear stories about what happened just on New Year's Eve in Saskatchewan, where inmates were treated to pizza and pornography on New Year's Eve, and that includes as many as 125 sex offenders.
I guess two issues. I mean, first of all, we're outraged, and we're starting a national campaign next Tuesday to carry our message forward. But first of all, we're outraged on one sense because we can't keep inmates who are dangerous behind bars. But when they are kept behind bars, they're housed in a club-like fed setting. And we take great offense to that. I mean, there's some serious dangerous people here that have committed crimes such as murdering police officers who are being housed inside, and they're not secure facilities. They're allowed to fish. They have golf courses. And to us, this is totally unacceptable. We're not asking for the ball and chain, but we are outraged when inmates are outfitted with golf clubs and tennis rackets. That's not the purpose of penitentiaries.
How often does that actually happen, though?
Well, we had an individual who murdered a Sudbury police officer. He was incarcerated for 6 years. We just found out last fall that he was serving his time at Williams Head in British Columbia. This is somebody who killed a police officer who was lying in a ditch with a broken leg, shot him in the back of the head execution style. The trial judge said he should be kept in a maximum security facility to protect the public. We found out that he's at Williams Head. He's allowed to fish, cook his own meals. There are no fences. This is unacceptable. We raised it with the Federal Solicitor General, and his answer was to wipe all the information off Corrections Canada's website. It's nothing but a cover-up, and it happens all the time. Just 2 days ago in Victoria police arrested a man running through a schoolyard with a loaded handgun. He'd killed a police officer and crippled another one in 1983. What is he doing out when he's sentenced to life imprisonment? We don't know. These things are unacceptable. They happen on a weekly basis.
Why do you suppose that this is happening?
I think because nobody's holding Corrections Canada accountable. The public, we can debate over the merits of things like capital punishment, but the public wants truth in sentencing. If somebody's sentenced to life for 25 years, they want to know what that sentence is going to be. In Canada, life isn't life, and it's not even 25 years because you can apply for parole.
Explain that, because I know, Bruce, that there are so many people watching this program today that assume a life sentence means the rest of your life.
Yeah, and I want to say in terms of capital punishment, police officers would be split. But life, if you kill a police officer or first-degree murder, it doesn't mean life. It means that you're sentenced for 25 years. But you can apply for parole after 15 years, and 80% of the people who apply are granted parole, full parole. And you can imagine what it puts the victim's family through, and coworkers and friends once again. I mean, those aren't adequate sentences. If our government wants to sentence people to 15 to 25 years, let's say it. Let's not hide the truth from the public. But instead, we say life, and it doesn't mean life.
Okay, I want to talk to you more about that. Also, we're going to open our phone lines. The numbers to call, 905-332-3131 or 416-203-0302. We're back with more right after these messages. The question we're asking today, do prisoners have too many rights? And Bruce, you would answer that question with a definitive yes. As a matter of fact, you say sometimes you have to ask who's running the show.
Well, and we've asked that of the Solicitor General. I mean, who's the monkey and who's the organ grinder? Who's making decisions here? The Solicitor General passes it off on to Corrections Canada, and it's his responsibility, and he's got to be accountable for some of the things that are happening.
Is doing time in Canada really all that cushy, or is the idea of club fed just a myth?
Well, there's no question that club feds exist because they're well publicized. A lot of the background material disappeared when Corrections Canada wiped it off their website last year. But you look at a place like Ferndale in British Columbia where Colin Thatcher, I mean, it was a well-known case when he brutally murdered his estranged wife. He's transferred...
Brutally murdered.
That's right. He's transferred to Ferndale in British Columbia, and he's allowed to bring his own horse with him while he's serving his time for a murder conviction. I mean, that's unacceptable. We had a police officer in Toronto killed a couple of years ago, Bill Hancock's. His two killers were found, two females were found in a veritable love shack in Joliet in Quebec. We've all seen the Carla Homolka videos.
Yeah, speaking of Joliet.
Of different parties. I mean, this is unacceptable. We believe in rehabilitation, but prison shouldn't be in a resort-like setting, and there has to be some security to keep inmates there. Frankly, the only security to keep inmates in places like Ferndale is who would want to leave.
How pleasant should prison be, and how harsh should it be?
I don't think, I mean, the purpose of...
Should prisoners have TV? Should they have commissary rights? Should they...
Prisons have to be secure when you're holding dangerous offenders. And I think you earn rights as you go along. But it's a big leap when we're talking about a television for several inmates in a living room or a joint setting to where people can play tennis and golf, because the average working person out there can't afford a lot of the luxuries that our federal government is giving prisoners.
What would you say to those who say, well, really, it does come down to a matter of funding, and all of these perks are necessary just to maintain peace among the prison population?
I think the idea...
Like, for instance, in Saskatchewan, a perfect example, the last two previous New Year's Eves, there were riots. This year, they piped in pornography and they gave the inmates pizza, and it was peaceful. And they also promised them a bingo game the next day.
And I think the question comes up, who's running the asylum? That if you have to bribe inmates to behave themselves, there's something wrong. It's not as if they're being mistreated. They're asking for extra perks, and we just can't give in to every demand. And I think, we always talk about prisoners' rights, but what about victims' rights? Because they're left out of this process as well.
I wonder how people feel. I would love to know how the victims of Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka felt when they saw those pictures splashed across the front page of her and her friends wearing cocktail dresses and enjoying a birthday party.
Well, and I've talked to a lot of victims.
I have to tell you, Bruce, I never in a million years would imagine that could happen behind bars.
I was a police officer for 22 years, and I talked to the family of Joey McDonald, the officer who was brutally murdered, and they feel left out of the process. They're trying to meet with the Solicitor General of Canada right now, and we're going to finance their trip down so that they can meet with them. But our focus isn't on victims, and it should be.
How is it possible? The story that I mentioned off the top, I couldn't believe what I was reading. I had to read this story in the newspaper over many times, that prisoners have won the rights just on moral grounds. Now, already in prison, if you have religious beliefs that prohibit you eating meat, that's already been honored. But now just your own moral or ethics, if you want to eat vegetarian, you can. That's a constitutional right that prisoners have. I'm not so amazed that we're serving special fare to prisoners, but I'm amazed that they have the ability to take this to court, because who's paying for it if not the taxpayer?
Well, you're right. I mean, ultimately it's the taxpayer, but when we look at some of the excesses, you know, the vegetarian meals really pales in comparison to first-degree murderers who still pose a risk being housed in places without fences and having all these other rights. It's frustrating for police officers, and it's got to be extremely frustrating and heart-wrenching for victims' families.
Well, speaking of victims' families, joining us on the phone, Gary Rosenfeld. He's the executive director of one of the largest advocacy groups for victims' rights. That's Victims of Violence, and he joins us on the phone. Gary, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Ron.
Gary, you have really not minced words. You say this decision to feed vegetarian fare to prisoners is nothing more than insanity. Why do you say that?
Well, it is insanity. The reality is that it was based on, the decision was actually based on morals and conscience. This is what they talked about at the federal court.
This is a sex offender who launched this.
Yeah, that's right. And you know, the problem is that he wouldn't be in prison if he had a conscience, and secondly, if he had any morals, he wouldn't be in the prison system. And the reality is that you know, for the last 100 years in this country, we have bent over backwards for criminals and given them more rights and more rights within the system. But as a victim of crime, my son was murdered by Clifford Olson in Vancouver in 1981. And this man has spent over $1 million in legal battles, taking frivolous, stupid things to the Supreme Court of Canada, similar to this vegetarian thing. And at one point, he had a case before the federal court in which he was appealing under his basic rights to have a inflatable sex doll in his cell. And the warden had turned him down on it, but he took it all the way to the Federal Court of Canada at a cost of probably about $100,000 to the Canadian taxpayer. And he got funding for this, for legal advice, everything else, to carry it all the way up to the federal court. So, you know, I've dealt with this for over 20 years. I've seen the insanity of the system. They have so many rights within the system that it's absolutely mind-boggling. In another case, Olson as an example, he and the warden of Prince Albert Penitentiary got together and conspired and made a series of 12 two-hour videos, tried to copyright them and put them for sale in the community. And as far as I know, they're available right now for sale. And 5 of the videotapes were gotten out of the prison system, and he has them available through his lawyer for sale to the public. And what they are is instructions on how to abduct, rape, and murder children.
Unbelievable. Gary, how gut-wrenching is it for you every time Clifford Olson launches another one of these frivolous lawsuits?
Well, it's frustrating. It really has been for, as I say, there was an estimate at one time that there was over $1 million that was spent just in his legal bills, carrying these frivolous, stupid cases to the federal court and or to the Supreme Court. We traveled from Edmonton, Alberta once. We flew out here and to Ottawa. We were living in Edmonton at the time. And he had a case before the Supreme Court of Canada complaining about the size of his cell and his living conditions in the cell. And, you know, at our expense, we traveled out here. The prosecutor in the case would not even meet and talk with us prior to the case being heard. But he had a whole team of lawyers up arguing that the cell was too small, that he needed a larger cell to house his television, his computer, and his bed, etc., and his dresser. He didn't have enough room in his cell, if you can believe this.
Unbelievable. Gary, I want you to hang on the line for a second. I want Bruce Miller to have a chance to respond to that. How is it possible that someone who should have forfeited their rights as a citizen when they killed 11 children can launch these kind of frivolous lawsuits from behind bars, all paid for by the poor beleaguered taxpayer?
Well, I mean, it's unacceptable. And to the same extent, I mean, I know Gary, he does a lot of great work, and he's very dedicated. And I know, Gary, you're going to agree with this. On one hand, you see the Clifford Olsons being given everything. On the other hand, the victims' families get nothing. I mean, I've gone to hearings, 745 hearings, to release convicted murderers early. And the family has to pay their way to be at the hearing and tell the story.
Well, that's right.
It's not the same thing.
Yeah.
for the accused.
Yeah, that's right, Bruce. We had to pay our own way in 1997 to go to Vancouver, stay in a hotel, all our expenses. Everything was at our expense, but with Clifford Olson, they flew him out there in a private jet. I don't know what that cost the taxpayers, but an awful lot of money. Actually, we were very fortunate in our particular case because the Canadian Police Association were kind enough to support us in our trip out there, and they eventually refunded part of the expenses of it. So, but not all victims are that fortunate. And they don't have the resources, the CPA. But the Canadian Police Association shouldn't have to pay for victims either, We shouldn't be allowing a lot of these things to happen. That's the whole point.
Gary Rosenfeld, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure.
Thanks, Gary.
Okay, Bruce.
When you hear heartbreaking stories like that, it's very frustrating because people like Gary Rosenfeld have made tremendous strides in bringing forth advocacy for victims of crime. But obviously there's still a long way to go.
And I think what the real frustrating part is, too, is that I know the public agrees with us. I mean, we've done polls that show over 90% of the public supports what we're saying about truth in sentencing. The frustrating part is the federal government's not listening.
Well, let's talk about truth in sentencing, because if you are sentenced to 5 years in Canada, that doesn't mean 5 years.
No, that's right. And you have the possibility of getting out of parole after 1/6 of your sentence. You also have the possibility of getting escorted or unescorted day passes for up to 60 days. That doesn't even have to be approved by the National Parole Board, which is a bit of a safety valve. But these people are just walking out the doors.
But what would you say, though, to proponents of the parole system that say it's very, very necessary, because it's a terrible thing to take a hardened criminal, let him or her serve 5 to 10 years behind bars, and that's just turn them out onto the streets without any kind of re-entry process, and that's why parole is so important.
Sure. Well, let's sentence people to 5 to 10 years. Let's make it clear when they're sentenced that if you behave yourself, if you take certain steps, there are success stories out there. We agree with rehabilitation, but let's make it clear. Let's not say you're sentenced to life and then you're out in 15 years. Let's make it clear right from the outset. I think that's what the public wants and deserves.
Wouldn't it be possible, too, to tack parole on to the end of your sentence?
Well, especially with first-degree murderers, we think that's what should be done, that you should serve 25 years and then be paroled into the community, that you've committed such a horrific crime that there has to be some deterrent.
Is it frustrating for police officers? Because sometimes prosecuting these cases, finding the evidence can be very time-consuming and laborious, and then to see somebody who's charged with heinous crimes get a plea bargain down, and then they're out on the streets in 3 years.
It's frustrating dealing, with the victims and knowing that these people are being put back out in the street and they're going to pose a danger again. Just as I mentioned just 2 days ago in Victoria, BC, somebody who was supposed to be inside is in a school with a loaded handgun, and he's already killed one police officer and crippled another. That's the frustrating part, and we just see it every day. I had a message from Edmonton this week because we're starting our campaign. An officer in Edmonton was gunned down in 1990 by somebody on parole. Corrections Canada is trying to release him just a short 10 or 11 years later. He was sentenced to life. We can't understand it.
It's hard to understand.
And we also know, too, Rhonda, that person's going to kill again, or that person's going to pose a risk. That's the frustrating part.
Bruce Miller, our time is gone, but thank you so much for joining us today on the show. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks very much.
Don't go away. We're going to continue this conversation. A couple phone lines open right now, although the lines are quite busy today. The numbers to call, 905-332-3131. We're back with more right after these messages. Stay tuned. The question we're asking today in Canada, do prisoners have too many rights? Joining us with his thoughts on all of this, Robert Metz. He's the president of the Freedom Party of Ontario. And Robert, you say there should really be no such thing as prisoners' rights. There's only really individual rights, and when you check into the Kingston Penitentiary, you should check those at the front gate.
Actually, no. I would put it in a little different perspective. Prisoners have the same rights you and I do, and that's why they're in prison. Because with every right comes a responsibility. And then when you're in society and you interact freely and voluntarily with other people, when you break certain rules, particularly the use of fraud, force, or violence against people, then you have broken your contract. because you had those rights in the first place. So the reason someone's in jail, if he's there for a legitimate reason, is because he has rights and he wasn't able to follow up on the responsibilities that go along with them. But once in jail, I think you're almost looking at a case-by-case situation. I think if you're talking about serious capital offenses, you're talking about a much greater restriction, not of rights, but of privileges, I would call them. Whereas if you're talking about someone who's only in jail because they didn't pay last year's taxes or something that isn't a crime against person or property as such, I think.
Fill out their census form.
Or something like that.
Something
right?
that you're guilty of, Robert.
Or a political crime, quote, which is a contradiction in terms. But you know, that would be a different type of a situation, certainly. But I think people are rightfully outraged that the idea, I think, of prison is, to me, more to protect society from the violent offender than it is to rehabilitate or to punish. I think it's more of a consequential thing resulting from the person's actions.
But should prisoners be able to launch a legal challenge to ensure that they're served vegetarian meals? Should a sex offender be able to say it's morally reprehensible to eat meat?
Well, you can say it, but for the courts and the police and the system to go along with it, that's the outrageous part. I mean, one of the reasons that you're seeing these court cases launch is because we've opened the door and said, hey, you can do it, and we'll pay for it. And you know...
Yeah, and it's you and I are paying for it,
exactly.
The taxpayer.
And unfortunately, victims get very little out of the justice system. The idea of victim compensation seems to be something quite new still. I know that I was in court one time for a minor assault case where I was assaulted and had a small bit of property taken. And after a whole day in court, the perpetrator was fined $50, and that was the end of it. I got nothing. I didn't even get my goods returned. I didn't get any acknowledgement of anything. That was up to me to pursue in a civil court, you know, after all the evidence had been read in and accepted by the court.
And to lose another day of work.
And at least. So from the victim point of view, it's very frustrating. But from, you know, again, we want to live in a civilized society. We don't want to have a society where we put people into prison and discover later to our horror that they've been abused, tortured, or otherwise. No. So in a way, sometimes I see these events as almost a subtle demonstration to prove to the Canadian public, see, we don't abuse our prisoners, although they've gone a little bit too far the other way.
Okay, our phone's very busy. Let's go to Phil on line 5. Go ahead, Phil. You're on the air.
Hi, guys. How are you?
Hi, great. Go ahead.
I'd just like to say I think we should go back to giving these guys a real hard time in prison, breaking bricks, and really punish them, you know, because maybe then they won't do it again, and it'll be a deterrent, because it's a joke in this country.
Okay, Phil, thank you so much for a phone call. Your thoughts on that, because there are two schools of thought. On one hand, there are those who believe that prison should be punishment, and then there are others who say that it should be all about rehabilitation, because sooner or later, the offenders are going to get out.
Well, I'm a big supporter of rehabilitation myself, but not in the prison system. I think that's something that you do afterwards. I mean, if somebody's in prison for life, theoretically, I believe it should be life, if the crime is serious enough. And in which case, rehabilitation wouldn't be an issue, since they're never getting out again.
Right.
So the only people that are affected by the rehabilitation issue are the ones that we know are going to be put out in the street. But I don't think that has to be part of the prison function. I think the rehabilitation should be added after the sentence has been served. And issues of bringing someone back into society should be brought in at the end, not during the service of the sentence. Because remember, the advantage of being in society and to have freedom and to have the rights that we have when we're not in jail is to be able to exchange values and trade and gain knowledge from each other. And when we break those rules, I've always thought prison should be like shorter sentences, but more working in a social isolation type of thing. Because I really think, and I think a lot of studies show lately, that that's a much more effective thing with certain types of prisoners, not with everyone. No. And again, I don't want to treat every prisoner the same way. I really think you do have to look at every case individually and look at the circumstances behind it. Sometimes people kill people accidentally, and you don't want to end up treating them the same as a Clifford Olson or a Paul Bernardo. So we have to be very careful with our justice system, and sometimes I think right now we've gone a little bit too far the one way.
Okay, let's go to Janet on line 8. Go ahead, Janet, you're on the air. Oh, Janet on line 6. Go ahead, Janet, you're on the air. Okay, let's go to Shirley on line 3. Go ahead, Shirley, you're on the air.
Hi, Rhonda, how are you?
Hi, Shirley, I'm fine. Go ahead.
Great. My question or comment would be, you know, sooner or later your prisoners are going to get out, at least the ones that are not in there forever and ever. And what concerns me is what they're being taught while they're in there. That is a big concern, because when they come out, if they stay in there too long, they learn prison school, and that's worse than them not doing the proper thing when they come out.
Yeah, Shirley, thank you so much for your phone call. You know, that's been a big criticism of our penal system in Canada, is the fact that, you know, particularly when we're talking about young offenders or young people, you know, maybe doing a hard time for the first time, is that they're put behind bars and they don't learn anything except how to become more accomplished criminals.
That's right. You know, to go back to the previous caller who suggested they just break stones or something like that, I would rather see them do something a little more productive that could produce perhaps some income that could be returned back to the victim or the victim's family if there's no victim left to return to. I think that, you know, in some cases, if you're talking about a non-capital situation, you know, where the crime is maybe just one of property, the quicker that someone pays back the loss plus a little penalty, the faster they get out. You could almost gear a sentence that way. But there are a lot of innovative suggestions that have been made for how prisons could be restructured to create more of a, you know, a rehabilitation type of an environment, as well as helping the victims at the same time. So, you know, the more we work towards that, I would support something on that level. But unfortunately, all they are right now is places of incarceration, and it's somewhere to lock somebody away for a while and then let them out when their time is up. And that, you know, also, we have this premise in society that when somebody commits a crime, it's a crime against society. And that's another reason why we tend to be lenient, quote, with certain prisoners, when really the crime is against a specific individual, and we have to realize that. And our criminal system should take those individuals very much into account. Not in the determination of guilt or innocence or anything like that, but definitely should have a role in the sentencing at the end.
Okay, we have to take a quick commercial break. A couple phone lines open. The numbers to call, 905-332-3131 or 416-203-0302. We're back with more right after this. The question we're asking today, do prisoners in Canada have too many rights? We're joined in studio by Robert Metz of the Freedom Party of Ontario. Phone's quite busy today, Robert, so let's go right to Janet on line 5. Go ahead, Janet, you're now on the air.
Hi, good afternoon.
Thanks
for taking my call.
Go ahead, Janet.
And it's on people who rape, people who abuse kids. They do have too many rights. They do. And they get out with the shorter sentences. And that's not fair to the people who've been abused or people who've been raped. If I was in that situation and the guy was given 60 years and then he get up in 18 months, it wouldn't make me feel safe. It wouldn't be right.
Yeah, Janet, thank you so much for your phone call. Not only that, in Saskatchewan, when you're behind bars, you can be a sex offender and be treated to an evening of pornographic videos.
Yeah, that's pretty bizarre.
That actually happened. Pizza and pornography on New Year's Eve.
Well, you know, I can't account for that or why it happened. I don't know what kind of excuses the people who are running that prison are going to give to us or have given. It's not the kind of thing one would expect to go on in a prison, especially with serious offenders. Again, I think the idea of a serious offense requires a much more serious type of sentence and a more serious type of security in the prison. I don't really know what else to say about that other than how ludicrous it actually seems on the face of it. Let's hope that what we're hearing is actually what transpired. Sometimes these stories get a little blown out of proportion, and then when you actually hear what happened, and maybe the movie wasn't really pornographic, it was just had a racy part in it, or maybe the pizza wasn't that good.
It was frozen pizza. Yeah. It was frozen pizza.
Was it?
so it probably wasn't that good. Let's go to Bruce on line 3. Go ahead, Bruce, you're on the air.
Hello.
Hi, Bruce. Go ahead. You're on the air.
Yeah, I'd like to speak in regards to the gentleman there talking about rehabilitation. Like, he's talking about rehabilitation. Well, they're tearing down places like Guelph Reformatory, and they're doing away with Mimico Correctional Institutions. Right. But they're building a jail that's like a bird's nest or a bird cage up in Milton to house 500 or 600 inmates. Right. And all those inmates are going to be allowed out of their cells 23 hours a day, or out in their cells 23 hours a day, fed in those cells and not mingling with any other inmates. Well, I can't see how that going to work every day like they used to do in Guelph and working in meat factories and woolen mills and doing dishes and cooks, where opposed to putting them in Maplehurst. I can't see going to Maplehurst as being any kind of rehabilitation.
Yeah, Bruce, thank you so much for a phone call. There is a movement, and you know, some people are really frightened about it. You know, creating really these small super cities to house prisoners.
That's another way of trying to deal with this situation, because of course what most of the public wants with respect to a prisoner is to have that prisoner kept as far away from them as possible. I know in my own community, whenever they start a rehabilitation home of some sort and put it in your neighborhood, and then you can bet that the neighbors are going to complain about that. So you're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place with these types of prisoners. Again, I think we're only talking about one kind of prisoner, you know, the real serious type, the rapist, the murderer, the person who's committed crimes over and over again. Maybe that is an answer, put them away in a further away facility, but you certainly can't do that with the run-of-the-mill person who's going into jail for petty offenses and things of that nature. That's a whole different story.
I still like your model, though, where you can put, you know, as long as prisoners are not too dangerous or too disruptive, regardless of the crime that they're charged with, put them to work, help them to make restitution.
And they should earn the privileges that they have within the prison environment, not be handed them as a matter of some sort of, you know, endowed right that they have, because those are not rights. When you go to jail, you don't lose your rights, you lose your freedom. And although those two things are intricately, you know, bound, when you don't have your freedom, you can't do too much. That's a tremendous loss to someone. I mean, some people over history have given their lives for freedom. They'd rather be dead than not have that. So that we have to separate that whole issue of rights versus freedom. When you go to jail, you still have rights, but you just don't have your freedom. And the reason you don't have your freedom is because you have your rights. And you know, fell down on the job, so to speak, on dealing with rights. You just didn't follow through on what your obligations and responsibilities were.
But if you want to bring in private industry, though, if you want to put inmates to work, maybe like through a private contract or whatnot,
you know, one of the problems with that is?
It gets very complicated,
it does,
though.
And you get unions complaining about it, too.
Well, I could see, though, like if you have one business out in the private sector struggling to make ends meet, and then you have like prison inmates who can put out the exact same product at a fraction of the price, it's not very fair.
That's why generally you would find most prisoners put to work on jobs that aren't really that competitive in the marketplace. I know that when we drove down to Florida a few times,
defense contracts.
Yes, or you'd see the prisoners cleaning up the roads along the side of the road, you know, like, and it looked like a chain gang kind of thing, but at least they were doing something productive.
So what do you think the answer is in all of this? Do you think the pendulum has swung too far the other way? Do you think there really is, you know, a club fed out there, or a club fed mentality, or are these just isolated stories?
Well, it must exist, because we keep hearing the stories over and over again. I always find it a little contradictory that there is even such a thing as a so-called prison community, because that giving them a community is why they're in jail. They couldn't operate well in a community outside. So deprive that community from them, to let them realize what it's like not to be part of a community, so that when they come back out, the benefits of the community become more readily, you know, noticeable to them, and maybe they'll rehabilitate themselves. That's the only way it's going to happen. And I don't think you can rehabilitate with a stick. I think you kind of have to rehabilitate with a carrot, but it has to be very carefully done, you know.
Well, in a minute we're going to talk to Duncan Gillespie from the John Howard Society, and he says it's impossible to punish and rehabilitate at the same time. Do you agree with that?
I would agree with that.
So what should we put the emphasis on? Nobody wants prison to be a pleasant place.
Well, again, I think with dangerous prisoners, the issue is society at large. Keep them away from us. That's right. And then it's up to them to rehabilitate themselves or go through some sort of stage. I mean, people can help. I think it's more of a volunteer thing and more of a thing that people have to get involved with. But the idea of having communities within prisons where they're still doing the drugs that they were put in jail for or something like that gets a little bit ridiculous. So that you want to have a serious consequence to certain actions. We want to make sure that we can live in a society where people cannot initiate force against each other, or know that there's a very serious consequence if they do. And the same would hold to property theft and to crimes of violence like rape and issues like that. Unfortunately, even as homeowners, our rights to defend ourselves are being taken away. You know, like you're in a situation now where if somebody breaks into your home, you can't really legally defend yourself with the force necessary, or you might find yourself, you know, in the witness box as the defendant, not as.
That's not exactly true, though, Robert.
Well, some people have certain. There's been
It depends
stories
on
like
what
that.
your force necessary is.
That's true.
Because I suppose if you had a, well, we're getting off track, because if you had a gun out, you could be charged with unlawful storage of a firearm, because
Well,
your guns
that's an illegitimate
are
law.
supposed to be stored with trigger locks, and your ammunition has to
However,
be
we
stored.
break a principle. As soon as a criminal walks into your property, he gives up certain amounts of his rights too, because that's your area, you know.
Right.
And the idea that you have to relinquish to him, rather than the other way around, is the precedent that I don't like to see. That's sort of buried in those kinds of reactions.
Robert Metz, our time is gone, but thank you so much for joining us. Don't go away. We're going to continue this conversation. Talk to John Howard, talk to the John Howard Society about all of this. The numbers to call 905-332-3131. We're back with more right after this. Welcome back. The question we're asking today, do prisoners have too many rights in Canada? Joining us with his thoughts, Duncan Gillespie. He's the Executive Director of the John Howard Society of Hamilton, Burlington and area. Thank you so much for joining us, Duncan.
Pleasure, Rhonda.
You say that this is really a side effect. It enrages people when they hear stories about this prisoner, Jack Maurice, who has successfully sued for the right to be fed vegetarian fare. He's a sex offender, and he's saying, oh, it's morally reprehensible to eat meat. You hear the stories of Clifford Olson spending something of $100,000 in legal aid, which is basically, we're talking tax dollars, because he wanted, he said his cell was too small. And another one of his lawsuits, he wanted to have a blow-up sex doll in his cell with him. It enrages people.
And justifiably, and it enrages me too. And what you've done is you've identified specifics, and you've identified incidents and examples and extreme examples of where people have abused rights. Should everybody have those rights taken away? I think you have to take a look at the implication of people who are in that situation not having any rights, and what that says about us as a society. You know, do you want to live in a society where people are allowed to be locked up in whatever, correctional institutions or mental health institutions, and never shine a light in those institutions to see whether or not they're being humanely and properly treated? Do you want to live in that kind of society, or do you want to live in a society that has an open courts and open jails and that kind of thing? If you do, then you pay a price for that. And sometimes the price you pay, and it is difficult to swallow, but the price you pay is frivolous lawsuits from time to time. I think you have to look at the big picture. And I mean, I'm understanding of the justifiable outrage when you speak about the specifics. But if you look at the big picture, you say, is it a situation where you want to have no rights for these people, or you want to have rights and accept that they will be abused from time to time?
Do you think part of the reason that we're seeing stories like this, like for instance, the Saskatchewan tree story, really, as a woman, I'm just absolutely horrified that they would show the prisoners porn on New Year's Eve and serve them pizza. But in 2 previous New Year's Eves, there have been terrible riots in the prison. This year, everything was calm. Is that show you that there's a lack of staffing, or is there something going on that you have to sort of bribe the inmates to behave themselves?
Well, clearly that's what happened. I mean, and as I think you indicated, there's an ongoing investigation in that, and sort of don't know the full story yet. But clearly that's what happened, is the inmates threatened one way or another that there would be another disturbance, and they were bribed into acquiescence by pizza and highly inappropriate movies. I think that speaks to the whole management of our penal system, and who's in charge of those kinds of situations, and who's you know, who has the authority and so forth. I think it shows the desperation on the part of staff in terms of the resources that they have and so forth. As we look at and you had alluded to the super jails earlier, as you look at a system that has less and less interaction and contact, human contact in those institutions, you're going to have more of those kinds of incidents where inmates, in fact, will have the authority and the power by virtue of that kind of threat. And you don't want to have that.
Is it concerning to you that we are making this movement toward the big super jails?
Yeah, very much so, and I think your previous guest talked about the fact that you want to isolate these people, and he talked about, well, you don't. I think he's talked about you don't want to put in there sort of petty criminals, and so that's exactly who's going in there. What we're doing is we're closing down those small institutions that are part of our community, that say we have communal problems, we resolve them in our community. These people come back into our community. They're only serving 3 months or 6 months. They're going to come back into our community. Instead of that, we're shipping them out of our community. That's exactly the type of inmate who's going to go in there, and as Bruce, your caller, indicated, is going to spend 23 hours a day in his cell. Now, what's that going to do to him, and what's he going to be like when he does come back to your community? I suggest to you he's going to be worse off, that offender, than he was when he went in. I don't see how that serves you.
Do we need to put more of an emphasis on rehabilitation? Because, Duncan, you say it's impossible to punish, and I think most people still hold on to that concept that prison should be a punishment. You're punished for your crimes, but you say it's impossible to punish and rehabilitate at the same time.
Well, I think the analogy that I always draw is you want to take a look at prisoners in the same way, in a certain way, that you look at child rearing. And you look at how you try to discipline a child and how you try to teach a child. And when a child does something wrong, or you're trying to teach a child to do something right, you don't punish. You change their behavior, and you indicate that there's consequences and all those kinds of things. But you don't simply punish. You don't simply send your child to his room, deprive him of absolutely everything, and expect him or her to just learn in isolation and on their own, not only what they did was wrong, but how to do it right in the future. So punishment, we don't use it when we do child rearing. Why would we think that it would work with adults and young people when we're trying to correct their behavior as well too? So I think, again, you look at the big picture and you say, what is the purpose here? What are we trying to do? Do you want to punish? Do you want to rehabilitate? What is the purpose? If the purpose is to get the person to not do it again, then I ask you to ask yourself the basic question, which of those two interventions is going to get you the outcome that you want? Now, if the outcome that you want is feeling better about yourself because you punished, then accept that you won't get the other outcome of changing that person's behavior and making your community safe. But you've got to make the choice. But don't ask me to do both. Don't ask me that I must punish people in institutions and then hold me accountable for not rehabilitating them. Tell me what you want me to do. I know what I think I want to do, and I know what I want to do as a citizen. It's very hard to do that and punish them at the same time.
Perhaps we should make a greater distinction between violent offenders that are not likely to be rehabilitated. I'm talking about the Clifford Olsons, talking about the murderers, Karla Homolkas.
Yeah, exactly right.
You know, people who, like, you know, serious sex offenders, crime against children.
Well, and you look at the new youth legislation that just came out, it does exactly that. It separates the serious young offenders from the non-serious young offenders and says you don't send these ones to jail and you don't. It does exactly that. Some of your, I think both of your early guests talked about life sentences and how they weren't life sentences that people got out of 15 years and 25 years. But then you take a look at somebody like Olson, you take a look at somebody like Bernardo, they are in jail for life. The ones that get out and are in fact on parole for life. So we are making those distinctions between the very, very worst and the ones who do have some opportunity for redemption and for rehabilitation. And I think that's what you do. I think your previous guest talked about the individuality of how you respond. And I think that's what our system tries to do. When you do that, you err sometimes. And when you give rights, people abuse them. But I think you want to take a look at the overall picture and say, what is it you're really trying to achieve here? And within that, you accept that there will be failures. I think, you know, we say, we have people have all kinds of rights, the right to drive and the right to drink. And you say, well, people have the right to drive and they have the right to drink. People go out and drink and drive and kill people. We don't take that right away from everybody.
Oh, Duncan Gillespie, our time is gone, but thank you so much for joining us today on the show. It's always such a pleasure talking to you.
Pleasure.
Don't go away. We'll be right back with more Rhonda Live after these messages. Stay tuned. Finally today, call it a command performance. British dogs showed off their tricks for the producers of a new West End musical. This casting call for Chitty Chitty Bang Bang was no walk in the park. Here's a look.
Today we have dog auditions for the London production of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang.
Sit.
We're looking for, first of all, dogs with talent.
Teddy's 1 year old.
They have to be confident on the stage.
Teddy doesn't have any acting experience.
And most of all, lots of character.
This is Bucket and this is Scrim.
We're holding auditions for all sorts of dogs, so they can be any size, any age, any type, any make, any colour. And we seem to have had an enormous response. And there seems to be rather more dogs than we actually require for the show, but that's when the auditions will sort the men from the dogs.
May we have the next slot on, Andy?
what can Daisy do?
Look, she catches a ball.
Oh, can we see that?
If she's in the mood, so
Right.
let me just...
Are you in the mood, Daisy?
We're looking for 10 dogs and also for 10 understudies, or as we call them, underdogs.
Hello, Tiffany.
Hey, pretty girl. Would you like her to do?
Is Tiffany able to get on the chair?
I'll ask her.
It's a negotiation.
Brilliant.
Oh,
hey.
good girl.
Yeah, what a bummer.
Do they want to be stars?
They don't, but I want them to be stars, yeah.
Will she come down on command off the chair?
She probably will.
Let's try.
Come on, then.
Good. Very good.
Boy.
Shall we ask Murphy about the chair?
He'll try.
Hey! That's very good. Which dog is that making... Very good. No, it's very good.
Okay. Not when you have to live with it, it's not. I think we're likely to get a lot of chaos. Whenever you put a bunch of dogs together in a children's play, I think it's going to be fun too.
Beulah, Murphy, Charlie, the Jack Russell Terrier, Coco.
More than anything, it's really great for the experience for him to get used to the lights, the cameras, all the noise and all the hustle and bustle.
Is this what you want for him, stardom?
Absolutely, absolutely. He's made to be a star.
Way to go, Coco. We'll be back with more Rhonda Live right after these messages. Stay tuned. That's our show for today. Thanks for watching. Tomorrow on Rhonda Live, cell phones and driving. Some contend that it's a very dangerous mix. As a matter of fact, a cell phone conversation may have been a factor in a recent multiple fatality on the highways. We'll take a look at all the issues involved and hear some very different opinions. As always, our phones will be open to take your calls to hear what you have to say. That's all coming up tomorrow on the show. I hope you'll join me. In the meantime, have a great day, and I'll see you again tomorrow live starting at 2.
You're watching